The next thing on the prophetic timeline for the nation of Israel is a regional invasion. Ezekiel 38 and 39 detail out in detail where this invasion comes from, how it happens, and what the rest of the world does as they watch it, right? There will be a time where America doesn't join in, right? The young lions, right? Those amongst the isles, right? Will not join in, and we will just put our hands in the air and say, why is this happening again? I don't get it. Meanwhile, Israel will be left to defend themselves. And it will largely be an invasion from the north. You can read the details there in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And it will be frightening. It'll be one of those seasons where the conflict in Israel doesn't die down. What we've seen throughout history in Israel, well, at least since they've come back into their own land, is that things escalate and then they die down. They escalate and they die down. They escalate and they die down. At some point, this thing's going to escalate where it feels like it's going to take the whole earth in under it. Like everybody around the world is going to be concerned with what happens in Israel. Now, I believe that regional invasion of Israel is actually coupled with a couple of other things. I think one of the things that happens during or around that time is that the church gets raptured. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 talks about the time where the church will be caught away, taken out of the earth, where the influence of the Holy Spirit will be diminished on this earth, and he will restrain no longer. And when the support of Israel is taken away, out of America and out of the rest of the world, right? Because Israel is largely supported by Christians or Christian influence. When that support is taken away, literally Israel will be hated by all nations, which is prophesied in the future. If there's no rapture, right? And there are some in our church that don't like the idea of the rapture, whatever, we can argue about that later, right? But if there is no rapture and the church remains here, and Israel is hated by all nations, then those remaining will have to give an account for how they handled Israel during that time. Right? Because at some point in the future, all Israel will be saved. And that's the reason I believe the church is taken out, because it will pave the way for all of those who don't want Israel to succeed. Israel will be hated by all nations. There'll be a regional conflict that will scare everybody. And even Israel itself will be scared enough to allow a non-Jew to confirm a covenant, Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, to confirm a covenant with Israel that will guarantee them peace. That's a 7-year treaty, a 7-year covenant. Somebody outside of the nation or the parameters of Israel to set up a covenant that would guarantee peace with the Jews and the Muslim world will only be precipitated because the Jews are afraid of not having that accord. We know from Daniel and from other places that man will be an absolute genius. He'll be a political leader. We also know he's not American, by the way. Daniel chapter 9, this political leader will confirm a covenant with Israel for 1 week, it's 7 years. And peace for the nation of Israel will persist for the first 3.5 of those years. Now we read in the book of Revelation, the first 3.5 years of the tribulation are very difficult years, but none of them are a direct attack against Israel. The first 3.5 years are all natural disasters. Earthquakes, wars, famines. It's just the earth going crazy with the birth pangs of the last days. It's not against Israel. Israel's guarded for the first 3.5 years by the Antichrist. The Antichrist makes sure that Israel doesn't get attacked, that Israel gets what they need for the first 3.5 years. But something happens about the midpoint of the tribulation where the Antichrist has an assault, right, put out on him, and he miraculously recovers from an assassination attempt on his own life. And from there on, the Antichrist actually believes he is in fact God. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And he demands that the world worships him as God. He apparently recovers from that assassination attempt in some demonically supernatural way. So it doesn't make any sense to the world. He should have died. And he recovers halfway into this. And from that point on, Revelation 13, again, 2 Thessalonians 2, the Antichrist goes into the temple of God in Jerusalem that they've established during the tribulation period and demands to be worshiped as God. Directly connected to worshiping the Antichrist as God is taking the mark of the beast. By the way, again, nobody takes the mark of the beast by accident. The mark of the beast is directly connected to worshiping the Antichrist as God. There's no accident, right? And then only those who take the mark of the beast can buy, sell, and trade. Everybody else becomes persecuted. during the last 3.5 years of the tribulation, which is the time called Jacob's trouble. Jeremiah calls it Jacob's trouble. And this is the time then when the Antichrist turns on the nation of Israel. When all of that happens, nationally, Israel realizes we've been deceived. We made a mistake. We placed our hope and trust in a man who would give us political and monetary freedom, but we actually didn't place our hope and trust in the man who would guarantee us salvation and a relationship with God. At that point in time, Israel nationally, their eyes, the veil will come off their eyes, and they will look and realize we made a huge mistake. And by and large, the majority of the nation of Israel will not take the mark of the beast for the last 3.5 years of the tribulation, again, the great tribulation or the time of Jacob's trouble, and that will escalate in persecution by the Antichrist for those 3.5 years to the degree where Israel will have to flee to Petra just merely to survive the onslaught of the Antichrist. There'll be a small colony of Jews left, basically holding up in Petra, defending themselves against the oncoming armies of the Antichrist. And the last great battle of the Antichrist is at Armageddon. That battle is intended to destroy or wipe Israel off of the map, off of the face of the planet, just like Iran has been threatening for years, right? And they will come to Armageddon in Revelation chapter 19 with the hopes of destroying Israel, right? One last great battle to eradicate the earth of all of these Antichrist rejectors. And that's when Jesus Christ, Revelation chapter 19, comes back. Not this time for his church, but this time in Revelation 19 with his church. He will come back and he will defeat the Antichrist on the battlefield of Armageddon, trampling out the vintage of the grapes of his wrath, right? Wiping out the Antichrist with the word of his mouth and the brightness of his coming. And he will deliver Israel from this overwhelming horde, this final battle that is meant to destroy them all. And Jesus Christ will deliver them, and then eventually, Revelation 20, set up his kingdom on earth for 1,000 years, where he will reign out of Jerusalem, and he will then give Israel all of the promises of the Old Testament that he had told them that would come to them, will come to the nation of Israel during that last 1,000 years, right? During that 1,000 years, by the way, the church, those of us who have been raptured, those of us who have died and gone before, we will come back and serve Jesus and naturalized Jewish people who've gotten saved during the tribulation, humans, and we will come back and serve them in our resurrected bodies, right? And we will watch God bless Israel, and we will support him in doing so, right? By the way, when you come back at Armageddon, none of you have to wield a sword, right? You just have to cheer loudly. That's it, okay? Because Jesus Christ does all of the battle himself, right? And he shows to Israel what he could have done all along, right? But they rejected him first. And again, took the long way around the barn. Biblically, God has a plan for the nation of Israel. And if he doesn't hold to those promises, what kind of God is he? Right? The beauty for us is he's a really smart and powerful God.